Nicole and I first met at a church event in a small coastal town on the East Coast. From the start, we had a lot in common, including a love of beach days, movie nights, pro sports, running, volleyball, and parties. Friends often joked that we seemed like a perfect match. We officially became a couple during a volleyball tournament, which happened because my buddy Chris, who was supposed to partner with Nicole, had to bail at the last minute. He called to say he couldn't make it, so we agreed to team up for the tournament. Nicole was fearless on the court, diving for the ball and setting it up beautifully. I was tall with a good arm for hitting, so together we made a powerful team. We ended up winning the tournament and celebrated with some of the other teams at a local bar that night. Nicole kept reaching over to touch me, showing her interest. I was really taken by her beauty and her presence. After the night wound down, she invited me back to her apartment. She kicked off her shoes and settled onto her couch, and I found a seat beside her. "Wow, what a day," she sighed with a satisfied smile. "It means a lot to me too." I admitted feeling the moment's weight when Chris couldn't play. I figured we'd lose when he introduced us. "I thought you were cute, but I didn't." "We were actually expecting to win," she chuckled. "Well, here we are. You're amazing on the court." "Do you really think I'm cute?" I said, feeling my face warm. The wind and the night felt surreal. I blurted out, "I really like you." Then I leaned in and kissed her gently on the forehead. She laughed. "I couldn't have imagined today would end like this," she said. "I didn't either," I replied, still a bit stunned. "You were so good at volleyball. I was struggling." To keep my focus, it turns out you're not only beautiful, but talented too. Nicole moved a little closer, giving me this intense look, her face just inches from mine, her hand trailing slowly out my thigh. "How does this make you feel?" she asked softly. I could barely breathe, a little dizzier, and definitely a lot drier. I managed to confess that she let her hand travel further, her touch sending a jolt through me. "How about now?" I was at a loss for words. She leaned in and locked her gaze with mine. "This is making me think less about volleyball skills and more about you," she whispered. "I've got a few skills outside of volleyball, you know." I managed to joke. "That's the last thing I'm thinking about." Before I knew it, we were wrapped up in a kiss that left me breathless. I leaned back and looked into her face. Her eyes were bright, and her smile drew me in deeper. "Why the smile?" I asked. "You're just perfect. From your smile to those cute freckles." Her expression softened and a tear slid down her cheek before she kissed me again, her hand tracing over me, testing my readiness. "I want to see what more I can make you feel." She guided me closer to her waist as she whispered, "I love how you feel, Kurt." She pulled me towards her, and as we lay there, I felt like I was experiencing something extraordinary. A year passed, and our lives had intertwined so completely that we knew we wanted to make it permanent. We picked a small Caribbean island for our wedding, and 2 years later, we were married. We were living as one, and our physical connection was strong, though sometimes I struggled to keep up. We bought a house together shortly after we got engaged. It was a lovely old place in a great spot. In just a few weeks, we'd marked every room as ours, even the backyard. She often joked that it was a full tour of our love. People even told us we were the perfect couple. We had an amazing connection. We made good money. She was working in tech equipment sales, while I was in software development. In our free time, we stayed active. I was into mountain biking and photography, while Nicole loved cooking, pop culture, and keeping fit. We were both into mountain biking and photography, but Nicole also loved cooking, pop culture, and keeping fit. She would dive into pop culture quizzes, and I would marvel at her knowledge, especially when she was showing off her cooking skills. Even our political views lined up, as that was an era when being conservative wasn't popular. We would still agree on candidates and propositions every election cycle, despite our rare disagreements. Even if friends were around to witness, we quickly resolved any issues. They just laughed and nodded along. We were a great match, and our work relationships were strong. I was respected in my field, and my software skills were occasionally useful for her job. One night I heard her struggling with a new program in our home office. I stepped in and, after she explained the problem, I wrote a quick fix that not only sped up her work but also improved the software for her whole team. She thanked me a lot, and in her own way. We'd always managed our finances well, saving for vacations, a better home, and upgrading our cars. Whenever Nicole received a big bonus from a project, we'd reassess and often decide to buy, renovate, and rent out properties. 7 years in, we own 3 houses and a condo. I handled the renovations and tenant management, making upgrades like installing smart locks, security systems, and fixing sprinklers. Our 9th anniversary weekends often found me working on projects while Nicole worked harder than ever at her job. One Saturday, I had planned to work on the irrigation system at one of our rental properties. As I was grabbing my tools in the garage, she called out, "Kurt, baby, before you get lost in those pipes, I need a little help with something in the bedroom." "Is there a leak somewhere?" I yelled back halfway to the truck. Her voice was coy there. There aren't that many pipes in our bedroom ceiling, so I went to check it out. I dropped my tools and headed upstairs. When I opened the bedroom door, I was shocked to see Nicole lying on the bed, wearing nothing but a small buzzing toy and some playful clamps. She looked gorgeous. I was so surprised, I forgot to breathe. I realized I'd been holding my breath and dropping my keys. I stripped off my clothes without a second thought. Fixing pipes would have to wait. Nicole had me fully absorbed by the time we were done. I felt like I'd handled an intricate project, only this one involved a lot of measuring and no shortage of digging and inserting. It was a day of intense passion, both of us swept up in the moment, revving in each other over time. We occasionally discussed the idea of having kids now that we own multiple properties. We had our own properties and had put away some savings. I was eager to start that chapter, but she wanted a little longer to hit some more career milestones. Nicole had recently earned a big promotion, which was a proud achievement for her. I could understand her wanting to be financially rock solid before moving forward. For our 10th anniversary, our friends and family threw us a party themed perfectly for each other. We won a cornhole game and celebrated with a 4. We went on a day trip to the vineyard in style, traveling in limousines. When we got back, we barely made it through the front door before shedding our clothes. That night, the house felt like our playground all over again, with celebrations on the stairs, in the living room, and in the bedroom. Life was good. Not long after, Nicole got promoted again, this time to Director of Divisional Services. We celebrated at Lade's, a trendy restaurant downtown, and later that evening at home. Around the same time, she was introduced to Edward Cook, a new director at her office. Edward was tall, good-looking, and Edward was known for his charm and sharp suits. Women at the office admired his confidence and easy smile. Edward definitely noticed Nicole, even though her company discouraged relationships between management levels. Nicole and Edward were on equal footing, so there was technically no rule against them getting friendly. Their CEO, Rosalind, was a divorced mother of 2. She often hosted events where Edward would get plenty of attention. Edward, with his eye on Nicole, seemed to believe that no marriage was without its flaws. He also thought that Nicole might appreciate some adventure. They started having lunches together to talk about work. Edward did his homework, learning about my job, her favorite restaurants, hobbies, and foods. He often steered their conversations to flatter her, emphasizing her value at work and boosting her confidence. His company had targeted new accounts in Baltimore, where Nicole's regional zone fell within. He often asked her to travel to Baltimore to discuss her division strategies, making sure her work received full recognition. He'd arrange high. Nicole enjoyed the time they spent together at the end of dinners and interesting events. She soon became engrossed in her work with Edward. At home, I could feel a shift. We weren't as physically close, and she seemed preoccupied when I tried bringing it up. Her response usually led to complaints about work. Stress was making things worse between us. She planned an anniversary surprise trip to Austria, a place I'd always wanted to visit. She told me about it in May, and we spent the day planning our itinerary and looking at Austrian destinations together. It felt like a fresh start. A few weeks later, her company scheduled an executive retreat in July in Jacksonville, and she was expected to attend. Over dinner, she looked at me, her expression hesitant. "Kurt, I've got some good news and some bad news. Which do you want to hear first?" "Just spill it, Nicole." She took a deep breath. "Okay, I've decided we should put off the September trip to Austria and use the money to keep building up our savings instead. Plus, my company's executive retreat is in Jacksonville this July, so we can turn it into a little holiday." I sat there for a solid minute, stunned. "Wait, I thought you'd already be in Jacksonville in July." "I will be. But we'll get a hotel room covered by the company, so we'll save a lot. Jacksonville is a great place to relax, beaches, restaurants, maybe even some volleyball, if we get the chance," she added, brightly. I wasn't convinced, but if you're there for work, how are we supposed to do anything together? "Play volleyball, hit the beach. Don't worry, work is supposed to wrap up by noon each day. We'll have our afternoons and the whole weekend to ourselves," she said, giving me that reassuring smile. "Babe, I know we've saved a lot, and yeah, Jacksonville could be fun, but I don't see why we have to cancel Austria. I've been looking forward to that, and I was hoping we'd We're going to have a solid week to ourselves, and I don't know if you can ever have too much saved. She'd already canceled her tickets for September, so I had to agree. I made the best of it, booking us a nice restaurant in advance and checking into any local volleyball tournaments. Maybe Jacksonville would be a good time after all. Just before Jacksonville, Nicole had another work trip to Baltimore. I noticed she'd been less forthcoming about her time there lately. When I'd ask about her in the evenings, she'd say she'd had dinners with clients or meetings that went on a bit. I tried to shrug it off, convincing myself it was just the demands of her job. Once we got to Jacksonville, I had to admit the city was great. We arrived on Sunday afternoon, checked into the hotel, and spent time on the beach before heading to dinner. Nicole even managed to squeeze in a few volleyball matches with me, which made the trip feel promising that evening. Her company hosted a welcome dinner, and she asked if I could go to the dinner, and Rosalind said I could go with Nicole. I watched as Nicole spent most of her time with Edward, one of her colleagues. I suggested she stick closer to me or that we leave, but she brushed it off as business. She said, "Remember, we're here for a work retreat." I lingered, and Rosalind, Nicole's CEO, struck up a conversation with me after a few drinks. Her tone turned flirty, and she laughed a little too freely, even tracing her finger along my arm. It felt strange to keep things respectful, so I excused myself and went to the restroom. I could tell Rose was a bit embarrassed, and when I returned, I avoided her for the rest of the evening. Later that night, I convinced Nicole to stay at the bar for a few more drinks, but Edward soon joined us, cutting short any alone time we had. We decided to call it a night, but when we got back to the room, Nicole was too exhausted for any intimacy. As the week went on, her half-day work hours, I often ended up on my own in the afternoons, stretched to late. 4 of the evenings were taken up by exclusive company events, so I'd end up waiting for her in the hotel hallway, just hoping we'd have time together. I spent some time at the beach, played volleyball, and noticed that a few women there were friendly, but it wasn't what I wanted. I wanted my wife back. The atmosphere between us was off, and it didn't help that Rosalind, still smarting from my rejection, began using me as an example of a worker bee. By the end of the week, I felt like we hadn't really connected. We'd only been intimate a few times, and that was over the weekend. It wasn't the anniversary celebration I'd hoped for, but Nicole seemed more energized than ever about her job when we returned home. Soon, life went back to routine. She spent more and more time working in Baltimore, and every time I asked about it, she said it was meetings and client dinners. In September, I brought it up again with Nicole. "I've never seen your company so focused on Baltimore. What changed?" "You're right, Kurt. We weren't this involved before, but we're expanding quickly. Having a cluster of clients in one place lets us address more issues in a single trip." "Why are you handling so much sales?" I asked, pushing for more. "Rosalind thinks that having someone from post-sales there during the sales process boosts the close rate. It's been working. This is all part of a year-long plan. She said that after a long focus, things should slow down. I'll still have meetings, but the focus will shift more towards services. I hope she'd be around more, and that once the year was up, we'd get back on track." We'd felt more like roommates than a married couple. Our closeness was limited to about 4 times a month when she returned from. On Friday, I'd prepared grilled steaks and her favorite wine, hoping to make the night special. She hugged me, gave me a quick kiss, then poured herself a second glass of wine. "Thanks for the meal, Kurt. It feels like a holiday. I'm just glad you'll be home for the week. I'm hoping we can finally relax a bit." She gave a tight smile. "I'm sorry, honey, but I have to go back to Baltimore tomorrow night." I felt a bit disappointed. "I thought you'd be home all week." "Sorry, Kurt, but this is how the schedule played out," she said firmly, and I could feel the finality in her words. I started clearing the dishes in silence, aware that the evening wouldn't go as planned. She watched me from her chair, sipping her wine when I went to the laundry room to start a load. I called out, "Got anything for me to wash before you head out?" "No need, Kurt. Everything's clean." "You just got back. I know hotel laundry isn't cheap. Does the company pay for that?" "No, I did my laundry at Edward's apartment." They were speechless. "Where have you been staying the last few times?" she asked. "It's not about saving money," Kurt replied. "Look, things need to change. I'm nearly 40, and when I reflect on my life, there are certain things I need. If I stay on this path, I won't achieve them. Working closely with Edward, I realized that I wanted a different life. He takes me to Broadway, museums, and fine restaurants. He's confident and treats me like a queen. I respect you, but you're not bad." I could barely process her words. Nicole and I talked about building a life and a family together. What about all that? I don't think my body's ready to slow down. Kurt, I'm not ready for kids. It's just not going to happen, she said firmly. I could see the reality sinking in. Have you been with him, Nicole? I asked, my anger building. My body is my business, she shot back coldly. I'll be with who I choose, and if that's Edward or anyone else, it's my decision. This is insane. You once told me you loved me, I said, feeling desperate. I think I was. Kurt, I think I've realized that I never really loved you. I'm going to file for divorce and I'd like you to stop calling me baby. It's not appropriate for someone who won't be your wife. I was numb, wondering if I'd done something so terrible that it pushed her away or if she simply saw me as less somehow. You're choosing him. He chose her because she's better, yeah. That's a fair summary. We're just different people, Kurt, and all these new executive friends of yours think the same. I asked incredulous, yes, people like Rosalind and Morgan have said as much. It's just obvious. Oh, I see. Well, where are you sleeping tonight? I asked, struggling to keep steady. You can have the guest room, she answered. I replied, heading down the hall. The next day, as soon as she left, I began looking for a divorce attorney. I met Melanie, a sharp blonde who listened carefully as I told her the story. She gave me advice on the legal steps, and we started to untangle our finances and divide our assets. This included the properties we'd bought together. I reached out to friends and family to explain the situation, which didn't take long to prompt an angry call from Nicole in Baltimore. She was very angry and said, "You idiot who gave you the right to tell everyone about our divorce?" I replied as calmly as I could when she demanded, "When did you?" She said you were divorcing me, and that you'd rather spend your life with that idiot in Baltimore. I reminded her that I thought we'd handle this quietly, mentioning it at family events, not making some big announcement. I also told her that I didn't give you permission to say any of that. She got really upset and asked me what was wrong with what I said. I was genuinely confused, so I asked Nicole to read from a... Unfortunately, I have to announce that Nicole has chosen to break her marriage vows and start a relationship with someone from her company who seduced her. We won't be able to join social events or continue to engage as a couple. Please respect the sensitivity of our situation and allow us to end our marriage peacefully. What's the problem, Nicole? I stand by what I said. I replied, my voice firm. She glared, clearly furious. It makes it sound like I was some fool who let herself be seduced by some slick guy with more power. Nicole, you wanted the divorce. Honestly, I wouldn't stay married to you now, even if I still loved you like I did a week ago. Staying with someone is a different situation. I can't work with someone who's openly cheated and left me, I said, feeling a strange sense of relief in speaking the truth. I've already been tested for STDs and am awaiting results. I suggest you do the same. If he was willing to sleep with you while you were married, who knows how many others he's been with? She ended the call abruptly. I was a bit surprised by her reaction, but it didn't really help to ease the pain I felt that night. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept going back to the good times, our trips, the places we'd been together, the love we'd shared. Even food has lost its taste lately. Eventually, the legal process moved forward. Lawyers took over dividing assets and soaring retirement accounts, separating our bank accounts. I canceled the shared credit cards because I didn't want to stay in the house we'd once shared when things were good, so she got it. I kept the apartment, which was closer to the city center and a better fit for her new image. The paperwork was filed and everything was finalized. I settled into a new apartment, not far from the condominium we once shared. This was about 2 months after she told me she wanted changes in her life. We spoke about things outside of work from time to time. I'd bump into her at church or at social events. One Sunday she introduced me to Edward, the man she'd chosen over me. "This is Edward," she said with a forced smile. Edward extended his hand with a smug grin. "I've heard a lot about you, Kurt." I looked him straight in the eye, my hands remaining at my sides. I wish I'd known where this was headed when I first met you in Jacksonville. I glanced at Nicole, shook my head and walked away in the months that followed. I divided our mutual friends into those I could trust and those likely to relay anything back to Nicole. Some I decided to keep on the surface, catching a beer or playing catch now and then, but keeping my deeper thoughts and feelings to myself. Neil Sedaka was right. Breaking up really is hard to do. My boss, Evan, called me into his office one day. "Kurt, if you need anything, just let me know. I know this must be a lot to handle, and sometimes just talking it out can help." I nodded, grateful. "Thanks, Evan. It's been rough, that's for sure." He leaned in, his tone serious. Listen, if the thought of revenge crosses your mind, don't. Do anything that'll get you into trouble. A few minutes of satisfaction isn't worth a lifetime of consequences. I've seen people ruin their lives over time. I managed to laugh. Thanks, Evan. You seem to know what you're talking about. He gave a slight nod. Let's just say I've learned a thing or two. I was curious what kind of revenge someone in my position could get away with. He thought for a moment, then said, think of it like a programming problem. Break it down. What's the goal? What's unacceptable and what's risky? Physical violence is off the table, obviously, but there are other ways to get satisfaction. Financial, legal, even social. Be creative, just like you were in coding. You've given me a lot to think about. Evan said he'd give me as much time as I needed to take his advice in. I took him up on his offer that afternoon. I found some peace and focused my mind on strategy rather than emotions. I got permission to use the conference room and set up a brainstorming board on an old easel. I wrote out categories for potential revenge: social, financial, professional, self. I also thought about esteem and legal. I invited a few close friends from work to help me think it through. They suggested adding physical and technical to the list, and ideas started flowing, some practical, others far-fetched. I let the ideas flow freely with no judgment, and it led to some interesting thoughts. At the end of the day, I took a picture of the board, locked it in a closet in the conference room, and thanked Evan again for his patience. I promised to limit future brainstorming to before lunch or after hours. A couple of days later, I was at the gym with a friend from church. He asked, "Are you going to join the annual beach volleyball tournament next month?" I hadn't thought about it, so I told him I hadn't. My usual partner and I split up. He gave me a sympathetic look. I know, but it always lifts her spirits. Why not join the men's team or something? Probably not this year, I said, feeling the sting of memories. Oh, I saw that Nicole signed up and I thought of you. Did she register for mixed doubles? He asked. Yeah, she did, I replied. What's the registration deadline? He asked. A week before, I told him that night, lying in bed. I thought it over and decided there was more to this than I thought. The next morning, I added a new line to the board in the office. Sports results. At lunch, I called my revenge team to revisit the matrix and brainstorm again later that day. I went out for a drink with an old friend from college, catching up and gauging his insights on my situation. The following day, Ben, one of the guys from my revenge crew, stopped by my office and shut the door behind him. Kurt, how serious are you about getting revenge? I asked. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Well, some of the stuff we brainstormed was just blowing off steam, but some ideas could backfire big time, especially if any of it crossed into questionable territory. I smirked. Come on, Ben. We were joking about the extreme stuff. I'm not taking anybody out. I assured him I wouldn't mind if Edward magically disappeared, but I'm not going to do anything illegal. As for Nicole, no chance. I'll never feel the same way or trust her again. Ben nodded, relieved. It's good to know that, but if you ever thought of reconciling, it's probably best to avoid these ideas. Ben, I'd never go back to her in this lifetime. The only thing I'm interested in is showing her what she lost by leaving me. I want her to feel the weight of what she's done. I told Ben, my voice filled with emotion, that spitting on someone's love and trust should have consequences. Love and trust are everything in life. And she ripped both away like they meant nothing. Ben nodded, taking it in. In all fairness, Kurt, he said, pausing, where did this perspective come from? I've got a few more things to work through. I'll be in touch. We might need some advice from Evan or someone who knows the legal side. I'll be in touch, he replied. The days passed, some easier than others, and I focused on my work in volleyball to keep myself moving forward. I found a new partner for the upcoming tournament, a striking woman named Dana Harris. I erased the physical pain line from the board. I decided to let go of any thoughts that leaned towards revenge. My boss didn't bring up my situation again, and Ben had gone quiet on the subject, which made me think this whole thing might have been a good mental exercise, but not something to act on. When the weekend of the volleyball tournament finally arrived, the place was buzzing. Teams from neighboring states and different churches showed up, turning this into a major event. It had grown far beyond the Sunday afternoon. Tournament Nicole and I won 10 years ago this year. It kicked off Friday and ran until Sunday's big barbecue after the awards ceremony. Nicole and Edward, her partner, made it to the mixed doubles finals. They'd made a name for themselves with their aggressive play, but Danny and I were set to take them on. Danny was a striking green-eyed redhead in her 30s with a powerful build and an athletic grace. She was over 6 feet tall with freckles that seemed to dance across her sun. We'd coordinated our outfits with matching 3/4 sleeve shirts, which made us look like a unified force on the court. The finals drew a big crowd and there was talk of a grudge match, which added to the buzz. People were curious to see if there would be any tension between Nicole and me, so we decided not to shake hands before the game. I had a sore arm, so I sat out the match, which went smoothly with Danny. I was consistently ahead, moving in perfect harmony on the court while Michael and Edward scrambled to keep up. The crowd was captivated by Danny's graceful leaps and flawless timing as she blocked and spiked the ball with precision. Midway through the second set, I shifted tactics, hitting the ball lower and targeting Edward directly. One shot seemed to be aimed at the open court. I redirected it, and it hit Edward square in the face, knocking him down. The game was paused while they cleaned up his bloody nose. After that, I stopped aiming directly at him. The match was over in no time, with straight sets of 21-4 and 21-10. It was a solid win for Danny and me. We went to shake hands at the net when Nicole reached out and asked about my arm. I told her it was all right. "Ma'am?" I replied loudly enough for everyone to hear. Then in a low voice just for her, I added, "You're on a losing team." Nicole pulled her hand back, and her face twisted in anger. She took a swing at me, but I dodged easily, just like I had on the court. She checked around quickly to see if anyone noticed, but nobody was close enough to catch what happened. The spectators must have assumed. She was a bit of a sore loser, maybe even a bit jealous as she walked away with a scowl at the awards ceremony. I found out that for the first time, the small plaque on the perpetual trophy would include not just the winners' names, but also the losing team's names and the score. Nicole looked genuinely upset when she realized her name would be etched into the record of that defeat at the barbecue. Afterwards, Chris approached Danny. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" Danny smiled politely. "I don't think so, but I get that a lot." I explained that Danny and I had been friends in college. "We used to play volleyball together," I said. "She was always the star," I added. "She made it to the Olympics on the U.S. beach volleyball team, but she had to step down due to an ankle injury. She still gets recognized, which makes sense." After I took Danny home that night, she invited me in for a nightcap. She changed and we settled on our couch with our drinks. She looked at me, her green eyes warm. "You know, Kurt, this started as a rematch, but these last few weeks I've really enjoyed our time together," she said, leaning in and giving me a soft kiss. When we pulled apart, we shared a lingering kiss. I looked at her closely, taking in every detail, from the soft curves of her lips to the sparkle in her eyes. "Danny, I'd love to explore something more with you," I said. "But right now, it feels like this might just be me reflecting on my past. You deserve better than being part of an echo of something that's over." She smiled, understanding. "I don't want to be anyone's reflection either," she replied. We agreed to go on a proper date in a few weeks. After a quick kiss, I walked back to my apartment alone, feeling like I was finally grounded for the first time in months. The divorce had been finalized, and although Nicole and I were living separately, we still shared the same community, attending the same church, and mingling with the same friends at work. Ben asked me how I was handling things. "Are you ready to let go of the revenge board?" he asked. I thought about it. "To be honest, Ben, I still don't feel like I've resolved 10 years of lies or a decade of love that was treated as disposable. It feels like she tossed me aside like an old shirt she didn't want anymore." Ben gave a knowing look. I added a note about the nose from volleyball next to the physical pain category, and initial divorce announcement in sporting humiliation under social humiliation. I highlighted red to show that it's done. "Ben, what's your new idea?" Ben explained his suggestion, laying out the strategy carefully. His remark had 2 components. One was something I'd already discussed with Evan, which I was handling. The second option was entirely up to me. We spent a while discussing the pros and cons, weighing the long-term effects. I had to think about the long-term effects and the potential fallout. By the time the meeting wrapped up, I was left with a lot to consider. I wasn't sure what path I'd take next. After everything that had happened, I tried to keep my focus on moving forward. But then I heard that Nicole was pregnant and living with Edward in the apartment she'd taken in the divorce. I'd done my best to avoid reminders of her. I even skipped church. But one Sunday, as fate would have it, I ran into her in the car park. She saw me wearing a smug smile as if I'd won something. "Are you going to congratulate me?" she asked, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. I forced a calm expression. "You said your perfect body was too precious for pregnancy, Nicole," I replied, Or was his top-shelf seed just too good to resist? She rolled her eyes. It must have been strong because it wasn't planned, she said. Believe it or not, how far along are you? I asked, barely able to contain my contempt. 7 months, she replied, her smirk growing whiter. So you didn't even wait for the ink to dry before jumping into it, huh? I sneered. She tossed her hair back. Oh, please, Kurt. You and your little volleyball partner are the real losers here. Always have been. I let out a bitter laugh, not caring anymore about appearances. Well, I hope you enjoy your top-tier Monte Carlo vacation. Just keep an air sickness bag handy, I said, ready to turn and leave. Goodbye, loser, she muttered as I got into my car without another look, as much as I wanted to leave that encounter behind. I couldn't help but watch from a distance as her life, that perfect life she'd so carefully crafted, started to unravel. The company she was so proud of, the job that was worth more than me, started sinking fast. They'd built their prize software on stolen code, and now the original owners were coming after them for every penny they'd made. Layoffs hit, and those lavish 6-figure salaries were gone. I bet her bonuses are gone now. Her whole company is fighting to stay open, trying to get a good deal on licensing to avoid closing down completely. They've cut costs, and morale is down. Edward, her ideal partner, was in no mood to deal with the aftermath as the pregnancy continued. Edward's attention was elsewhere, and his frustration grew. He no longer cared about doctor's appointments or baby plans. I imagine him feeling more trapped and fulfilled, realizing this wasn't the high society life he'd envisioned. Then one day, Edward decided he'd had enough. Nicole came home to find him packing the last of his things into a suitcase. What are you doing, Edward? She asked, her voice sharp with panic. He glanced at her without emotion. I quit the company and took a job on the West Coast. My flight's in an hour. Her face fell, but she didn't ask any more questions. The babies were coming any day now. When would he be back? He gave a shrug, not even looking up. I don't plan on coming back, Nicole. You have health insurance that should cover the birth, but what about helping with our child? What about us? He told her he was going on vacation in Monaco, and that diapers and strollers weren't her thing. He said he thought they loved each other, and that everything would get better once the baby was here. She pleaded with him, saying she thought they loved each other, and that everything would get better once the baby was here. He just gave a small, indifferent shrug and said goodbye. He walked out, leaving her standing there alone. She fell onto the sofa. She was feeling utterly shattered, but she didn't even have time to process it. A sharp pain shot through her, and she suddenly realized her water had broken. She grabbed her phone and called Morgan, a friend from work. Morgan, I'm in labor and Edward just left for the airport. I need help. She could hear the concern in Morgan's voice as she replied, Oh, Nicole, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, but I'm out of town with my sister. Try calling Sue or Annabelle. They're closer to you. Morgan replied before the call ended. She drove a few blocks before the contractions got too intense to keep going. Stranded on the side of the road, she scrolled through her contacts and finally landed on Kurt's name. She took a shaky breath and pressed call, hoping beyond hope he would answer. Kurt answered, a bit stunned to see her number flash across his screen. Kurt, I really need your help. Can you come right away? She begged, her voice full of desperation. What's going on, Nicole? Why are you calling me? I asked, confused by the urgency in her voice. Kurt, I'm in labor. I'm just a few blocks away, near Brewood Place Apartments. I'm on the street. Please, I can't do this alone, she pleaded. I took a deep breath. I was trying to keep my own frustration in check. I replied, I'll be there soon. I hung up and found her BMW parked haphazardly on the side of the road with its headlights and hazard lights flashing. I pulled up, got out, and walked over to her windows. She rolled them down, looking worn out and desperate. Thank you for coming, she whispered, struggling. I asked if she needed help with the car to catch her breath, noticing her baby bag on the passenger seat. No, it's not the car, she gasped, wincing through a contraction. My water broke and the baby's coming. I need you to take me to the hospital. I glanced around, trying to process the situation. Where's Edward? She asked, her face twisted in pain. She was in pain and tears were filling her eyes. He'd left. He was on a plane to the West Coast. I stared at her, trying to comprehend it. You're giving birth and he just left. Call him back. She shook her head, her voice breaking. He won't come back, Kurt. He said he doesn't want to be a father. I took a steadying breath, fighting down my disbelief. Right, give me your phone. She passed it over, and I called emergency services. Yes, I'm with a woman in labor on Avonal Drive near Brewood Place Apartments. Please send an ambulance immediately. Kurt, please just take me to the hospital. I don't want to ruin my car. I raised an eyebrow, glancing around at the BMW's leather interior. It's a nice car. The suit looks expensive too. She blinked, looking at me. She seemed confused. It turns out the software I wrote for your company is actually owned by mine. My employment agreement says I get a licensing fee from your company for the software I wrote for you. I got a 7-figure payout while you were cashing in those 6-figure bonuses. I don't think she was processing half of what I was saying as another contraction hit. I looked at her, feeling a mix of pity and satisfaction. The ambulance will be here soon, Nicole. I have plans tonight, so I need to go. Kurt, please, she gasped, her voice strained as the pain intensified. Stay until they arrive and help with my car. I shook my head, keeping my tone calm. That's what a husband or father would do. Kurt, the father would do. Nicole, she cried out, fumbling to open her car door as another contraction overwhelmed her. I stopped, looked back at her one last time. You and Edward are perfect for each other, Nicole. Without another word, I got into my car, started the engine and drove off, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices alone.